All right, welcome. Today, we're going to take a quick tour of maybe the most complex object in the known universe, the human brain. We're going to break down its major parts and really see what each one does. So, you ready? Let's dive in. First things first, when you picture a brain, what do you actually see? Is it just this one big, kind of uniform blob of tissue? A lot of people picture it that way, but that's really not the whole picture.
Yeah, you gotta think again. It's actually this incredibly organized structure. And for our tour, we can break it down into three main parts. That's gonna be our first stop.
Okay, so let's meet the big three. These are like the main continents that make up the entire world inside our heads. So, first up, we've got the heavyweight champion, the cerebrum. This is the largest part, the one with that classic wrinkled surface, and this is almost certainly what you picture when you think brain. It's our main processing center, running the show on everything from language and your emotions to, every single voluntary move you make. Okay, now, tucked right underneath that massive cerebrum, you'll find the cerebellum. Fun fact, that's Latin for little brain, and it really does look like a miniature version. This little guy is the master of balance and coordination. I mean, think about walking or playing an instrument, catching a ball. The cerebellum is the reason all of that happens so smoothly. It's also where you store all those skills that become automatic, like riding a bike. In rounding out our big three, we have the brainstem. You can really think of this as the brain's automatic pilot. It connects everything to the spinal cord and just tirelessly manages all the vital stuff we never ever have to think about. We're talking heartbeat, breathing, blood pressure, all the background processes that keep you alive. All right, so now that we've met the big three, let's zoom in a little bit. We're gonna focus on that wrinkled world we mentioned earlier, the cerebrum. The cerebrum is split right down the middle into two halves, the left and right hemispheres. Now, you've probably heard people talk about being left-brained or right-brained, right? Well, it turns out that's a massive oversimplification. It's true that some functions are handled mostly on one side, like language for a lot of people, but any kind of complex thinking, whether it's logic or creativity, it uses networks that fire across both sides. These two halves are in constant communication. They're a team.
So if they're a team, how do they talk to each other? Right? What's the bridge? What's the superhighway connecting these two incredibly powerful hemispheres? Well, that communication superhighway is called the corpus callosum. It's just this massive bundle of nerve fibers that make sure the left and right sides of your brain are in constant, seamless contact with each other. Okay, let's circle back to one of the most obvious features of the cerebrum. Why is it so wrinkly? I mean, what's with all the folds? And believe me, it is not just for looks.
Yeah, these wrinkles actually have names. The valleys or the grooves are called sulci, and the bumps or the ridges are called gyri. You can almost picture it like a tiny, fleshy mountain range.
So why bother with all these bumps and valleys? Well, it's actually a brilliant solution to a major space problem. See, to cram as much processing power as possible into the very limited space of your skull, the brain's surface just folds in on itself. This massively increases the surface area. It's kind of like crumpling up a giant sheet of paper so you can fit it inside a tiny ball. More surface area means more power. And here's what's so cool. These wrinkles, they're not random at all. They actually form natural boundaries, creating a kind of map that divides the cortex into 4 distinct sections, or lobes. So let's take a look at that map. Okay, the first major landmark you need to know on this map is a really deep groove called the central sulcus. Just think of it as a major dividing line. It separates the frontal lobe, which is right at the front of your brain, from the parietal lobe, which sits right behind it. All right, our next key landmark is another deep groove called the lateral sulcus. A pretty neat way to remember where this is that the temporal lobe, which it separates, kind of looks like a thumb tucked up against the side of your brain. So, using those two big landmarks, we can now clearly identify the 4 major territories on our brain map. We've got the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the temporal lobe, and all the way in the back, the occipital lobe. So, let's start on either side of that big dividing line, the central sulcus. In the front, you have the frontal lobe. This is basically your brain's CEO. It's handling all the high-level stuff like making decisions and controlling your impulses. And right behind it, you have the parietal lobe, which is in charge of processing all the sensations coming from your body, like touch, temperature, that kind of thing.
Now, that temporal lobe, the one that looks like a thumb, that's your brain's audio specialist. It's processing all the sound information coming in from your ears. And then, way at the back of your head, is the occipital lobe. Think of this as your own personal movie screen, your visual cortex, processing absolutely everything your eyes are taking in. And of course, remember we have two hemispheres? That means we have two of each of these lobes, one on the left and one on the right.
Okay, so we've spent all this time breaking the brain down into all these different parts, but here's maybe the most important thing to remember. None of them, not a single one, works in isolation. The brain is a deeply, deeply interconnected system.
So let's do a super quick recap of our tour. We started with the big three, right? The cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the brainstem. Then we zoomed in on the cerebrum. We looked at its two hemispheres, and we mapped out its four major lobes. But the real magic, it's not in any one of those single parts. It's in how they all work together, just seamlessly, every single second of your life.
You know, this quick tour of the brain's major regions, it really only scratches the surface. And that leaves us with a pretty exciting question, doesn't it? Now that we've got the basic map down, just imagine what we'll discover when we start to look even closer.